Hello, welcome everyone to JD Center of Arts 261st Meet the Artist program. JDC is envisioned as a unique art center that aims to preserve and exhibit its large collection of folk, tribal, traditional, and contemporary art. It's being built right now in Bhubaneswar, Orissa. Meet the Artist program started as an in-house program where invited artists, craftspersons, or scholars share their work, experience, insight through an illustrated talk since 2001. 260 such Meet the Artists have taken place on the second Saturday of every month. Achyut Kanvinde, 1960 to 2002. Achyut Kanvinde was born in Sindhudurg District, Maharashtra, and graduated from the JJ School of Architecture, Mumbai. He later shifted to Delhi to work at the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, CSIR as is commonly known, for the design of research laboratories, from where he was sent to the US with a mission to study labs over there. He enrolled at the Harvard University and worked under Walter Gropius, the founder of Bauhaus School, Germany. On his return to India, he worked for the CSIR and in 1955 established his practice with Shaukat Rai and later Morad Chowdhury. They carried out landmark institutional projects such as the Roorkee University, Aligarh Muslim University, IIT Kanpur Agricultural Universities at Rahuri and Bangalore, several dairies for the National Dairy Development Board in Anand and across India, Darpana Academy of Performing Arts, Ahmedabad, and the ISKCON Temple in Delhi. He also designed large-scale urban design projects like the Dronagiri Townshipnear Navi, Mumbai, and Central Business District, Shahdara. His work was published widely, and he lectured extensively both in India and the US. Kanvinde was awarded the Padma Shri in 1974. Kanvinde remained a staunch modernist who created a functional yet innovative and economic design using local materials and latest technology. The speakers today are Tanuja and Sanjay Kanvinde. Tanuja and Sanjay Kanvinde are partners in the studio practice of Kanvinde Rai and Chowdhury, Delhi, which is the legacy of Achyut, where Sanjay, architect and urban designer, has an experience of over 40 years in the field of architecture with degrees from School of Planning and Architecture, New Delhi, and Rice University, Houston. Tanuja is a graduate university from Vishweshwarya College of Engineering, Bangalore, and has had the privilege of being mentored by some of the modern masters of the country, Padalkar, Joseph Allenstein, Morad Chowdhury, and Achyut Kanvinde. Both Sanjay and Tanuja have been involved in academics and have been visiting professors at the SPA Delhi for the last few decades. Both have served at the helm of professional organizations for extended periods of time with meaningful contributions towards betterment of the profession. They have, in their individual capacities, participated in various jury panels, curated several seminars, and delivered many lectures. Many of the projects the firm carries out are award-winning competition entries. Though the firm has been involved in various projects or different genres, the primary focus has been on design and execution of educational institutions and milk processing plants across the country. I will not go into a lot of the awards that have gone your way because I want to just hand it over to you, but I want to talk a little bit about your last few things and especially the engagement with your whole monograph that you've done on Achyut. Both together have authored a monograph, Achyut Kanvinde Akar, on the legendary Indian architect Achyut Kanvinde that we're talking about today, whose extensive body of work was recently featured at a MoMA exhibition, the Project of Independence, Architectures of Decolonization in South Asia, and Kanvinde's work is presently being researched and archived by them. Thank you very much, and thank you for accepting our invitation to do this talk together. And over to you.
And welcome, both of you.
Thank you.
And you're also able son of Mr. Kanvinde. Mr. Kanvinde studied at the JJ School of Architecture, and I also studied at the JJ School of Art, although at different time. I'm very happy to be here because I was very lucky that I knew many architects of his generation in Delhi and Bombay. So, like Mr. Habib Rahman what you call, Doshi and others. And Mr. Kanvinde and I also met many years ago. I came to Delhi in 1968. And I genuinely believe there is no, a lot of people say architecture and art is both sides of a coin, which is a very wrong expression. I think it's like sugar and milk or sugar and coffee when you mix it. And in our temple architecture or in the Islamic or in the Gothic, wherever, you don't separate the art and architecture. Till today, quite often people believe architecture is a part of engineering. Mr. S.K. Sharma, the then chairman of HUTCO, was trying very much because every PWD, Public Works Department, has only engineers. He was trying to install an architect in them. Anyway, and like I mentioned earlier before we started, that in Khandagiri caves in the 2nd century BC, caves in Bhubaneswar, it is engraved that who designed it, how much money was spent, and etc., etc. It's very unfortunate that artists and architects have not worked together in India. Say for instance, Charles Correa did that building of the British Council, where a British architect tore off a piece of paper which is engraved into it. So, but I did a mural for Mr. Kanvinde's building in LBS Academy in Mussoorie. So all my request is to talk about, I'm very happy that you both are there to talk about Mr. Kanvinde and the generation, the genre of people who are very committed and they did not believe in the separate areas of art and architecture. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you. It's really a privilege to be part of this. Sanjay, would you like to start, please?
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. At the outset, we would like to thank JDCA for giving us this opportunity to talk about our father, Achyut Kanvinde, and to present his work. Kanvinde was a fairly simple, unassuming man of few words who believed that his work should speak for itself. Unlike his illustrious contemporaries, he received not too many awards during his lifetime. Apart from the Padma Shri in 1974, the IIA Gold Medal in 1985, his work was featured in the Festival of India, France, 1985, and in Vistara, 1985. And he also received the JK and the A+D Lifetime Achievement Awards. He did co-author a book on campus planning in 1969, but unfortunately, our lasting regret has been that most of his books on him, including his monograph, were not published during his lifetime. When he enrolled at Harvard, besides the architecture faculty, he was taught by artists such as Albers, Georgie Kepish, and the historian Henry Conant, which sustained his continued interest in history and the arts. He loved to travel and saw various places during his several teaching assignments in the US, including interacting with fellow architects and artists such as Chermayeff. Even at a later date, he made it a point to be in constant touch with artists and visited art exhibition at several galleries across the city, including IFX, Dhumimal Art Center, Lalit Kala Academy, and Sridharani Gallery. Kanvinde also admired artists and sculptors and was friends with a number of them, including Alkazi, K.S. Kulkarni, H.A. Gade, B.C. Sanyal, Shaukat Chowdhury, Satish Gujral, Dhanraj Bhagat, Sathe, and Ram Sutar, and of course, Jatin Das. Several of his early works were embellished with paintings and murals, such as CBRI Roorkee, where Hussein's work is featured, and as also CSIR headquarters in New Delhi. where Hussain had done a very large mural on the front facade, which unfortunately has now pretty much gone. Given his inherent drawing skills that he partly imbibed from his artist father, he cultivated this talent throughout his career, always supplementing the proposals with both a rendering and a 3D model, a carryover from his Harvard days. In fact, some of his clients, such as Verghese Kurian of NDDB, insisted on a rendering of the proposal as a prerequisite for approving a project. Kanvinde always tested his design ideas in terms of scale and proportion through models. He had a full-time model maker in his office to experiment with ideas on form. The models also helped him in his form visualization and allowed him to completely work around a building, especially the corners and junctions. I think I'll hand it over to Tanuja, who will carry on with the rest of the presentation.
Thank you. I must admit that structuring this presentation was rather challenging, considering the audience are not necessarily the architectural fraternity. When Jatendra called about a month ago, I was of course very happy and thought would be an excellent opportunity to showcase Kanvinde's work with an emphasis on the artist in him through the many sketches that he always did for many of his projects. He had used different mediums: pencil, pen sketches, watercolor perspectives, models, to convey his idea of a project to the client. While researching for the monograph, we discovered notes and thoughts he had penned, which we chose to reproduce verbatim. In fact, what makes the monograph significant is the assessment of growth and change of Kanvinde's work in his own words. Hence, in a lot of places in the talk, you will find it is in the first person. We've also used excerpts from the essays in the monograph. While the book simply documents the projects, we also dipped into the thesis of Vrinda Kanvinde, tracing the architectural authorship through the archives of Indian modernist Achyut Kanvinde, which analyzes the evolution of projects. That's a picture showing Kanvinde in his younger days. That's him with his parents. That's his ancestral home in Atra, Sindhudurg. He says in his own words, "I belong to a humble family from south of Dronagiri district, presently called Sindhudurg in Konkan, not more than 100 kilometers from the Goa coast. Although my early life was in Konkan, in a place called Atra village, I migrated to Bombay for high school education. Initially, I had no plans to study architecture. As a matter of fact, nobody in the family knew what architecture was about at that time. And when the stage of joining JJ School came about, it was primarily to get a job as a draftsman. I joined private art classes of Haldankar, artist, who was well recognized those days. However, I decided to change my mind as a family member thought that there was no opportunity of work for artists, and the idea of joining architecture came about." So that's how he begins his journey into architecture. This is in his studio, Professor Rubin here, and that's Kanvinde, the young Kanvinde. This is a group picture of the class with all the professors. There was CM Master, Narvekar, Billy Moria, Parelkar, and Dilima. That's, of course, Batley. And you have Kanvinde here again. These were the sketches which he had done in his initial years at the JJ. You can see the artist in him, the strokes, the manner in which he handled it. In some of them, you'll also see the marks that are allotted to him by the professors. They also had to reproduce the Jaipur portfolio in the initial years. This was one of the student work he had done. Again, you can see watercolor being used to kind of present the project. This was his thesis. So you can see that this was a design for a Hindu temple, which he had done for his thesis. And the last project which he did in his lifetime was also a temple. So, you know, in a way, it kind of went a full circle. So he says, when you look at the JJ school, he says, the JJ school in those days laid great emphasis on the classical style of studies and presentation. It had no set philosophy of any kind and was greatly influenced by classical European practices. There was a choice between the European classical and the upcoming modern style. Claude Batley, who was the head of the architecture department at that time, had no clear philosophy of his own. However, he was a strong advocate of traditional values, which at times meant adopting architectural embellishments of the past period. Though as students, we could not appreciate these values, studying history made us more aware of the world situation in course of time. Then post his graduation in 42, he worked with the PWD and then with W.W. Wood and Sons. And then he joined CSIR, where he, along with Shaukat Rai, was selected by the government of India for a training program in the US. They wanted to utilize his services for designing research laboratories in various fields of scientific research on his return. So what you see here are his interaction with Walter Gropius, who had kind of made a huge impression on him through his life. That is him in the studio at the Robinson Hall at Harvard, him graduating, and then that's the thesis project, which was a research laboratory. He talks about his experience at Harvard. He says, unlike the JJ school, Harvard was an altogether different environment. Design was a compulsory subject while others were electives. Fortunately for me, the first design project that I worked on was collaborative in nature, where students worked in teams. This helped me get used to the work environment and acquiring an overall understanding of the system. Other students in the class helped and guided me through the process. Gropius was an active jury member and gave crits in the design studio. His jury criticism was open to all, and he always welcomed the observers' questions. Gropius's oratory skills and confidence thrilled me no end. The enthusiasm that he was able to generate in the students was unmatched. Gropius' ideology and his contribution were the stimulants in the evolution of modern architecture. He will always be remembered as a great teacher and philosopher. His words and comments on the design jury charged the minds of students. The most important thing about the teaching methodology at Harvard was that they did not limit the education process within the four walls of the school. Students were exposed to leading professionals and provided with a wealth of reading material. On every subject, there would be viewpoints of several authors that one could refer to. During my education period, studying history of modern architecture was perhaps the most valuable experience for me. It helped me set a frame of reference and provided me with a basic orientation towards architectural design. So he says that he was actually truly indebted to Professor Walter Gropius. He says, I must acknowledge my tremendous debt to Gropius. It was he who really exposed me to the power of technology on the one hand and the psychological dimensions of spatial concerns and realizations on the other. The other people who made a huge impact on him were, of course, Nehru. When he came back after studying, they worked for a period of time with the CSIR, where they put up a number of well-known laboratory buildings across the country. And Nehru, as we all know, took keen interest in all of this. Kanvinde also curated a seminar at the Lalit Kala Academy, which was basically to decide on whether there should be a national style in the buildings that were coming up in the country at that point of time. These are various pictures where Nehru's either debating about a project proposal or inaugurating a building, etc. Some of the patrons and mentors who made a huge impact on Kanvinde's professional career and growth were Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar, who was the head at that point of time at CSIR, whom Mr. Kanvinde really kind of respected a lot. We also have Dr. Vikram Sarabhai, whom he refers to and says it was a huge learning experience when I interacted with him. I'm just going to read out a little excerpt on what he says about Dr. Vikram Sarabhai. He says, amongst my patrons and well-wishers after Dr. Bhatnagar was Dr. Vikram Sarabhai. Both Sarabhai and I had so much faith and confidence in one another that a stage came when we were not even exchanging letters of appointment for jobs entrusted to the firm, and yet our bills were honored without questions. I realized that I benefited by Sarabhai's association of observing problems with a scientific and analytical mind, and I developed in course of time sensitivity with good visual understanding and appreciation for artistic values. My association with Vikram Sarabhai in some ways was an education and added to my confidence and vision. Then we have Tirath Ram Amla, who played a key role in a lot of projects that he did in Jammu and Kashmir. They started off as client and finally ended up as being very good friends. Dr. Verghese Kurian, who also had a deep trust in what Kanvinde did, and they worked together on a number of dairy projects. Dr. V.A. Panandikar, who again had a lot of trust and faith, and they'd also done a number of projects together. In addition to this, of course, there were a group of fellow professionals. You have Habib Rahmania, this is Stein, Kanvinde, Doshi, and Korea, along with a bunch of students at NASA many years ago at Bangalore. And this is at the Vistara inauguration, where they're actually penning the swastika down, which is on the cover page of Vistara. That's Korea and Doshi. So all of them together had very healthy interactions, which kind of steered the direction that architecture took post-independent India. This, of course, is a caricature on a lighter note, which was done by one of our colleagues in the office, Kanvinde, Shaukat Rai, and Morad Chowdhury. A partnership which is far exemplary. Kanvinde says, in his own words, architectural practice is a never-ending process, which one keeps on accumulating and experiencing as one progresses. Over the years, I've come to believe that it's imperative that an architect develops sensitivity to human nature and a respect for human values. This, after all, is the very core of his work. So starting as soon as they come back, they are with the CSIR, and what you see in the next few slides are projects that they built for the CSIR. This is Atira, a wonderful watercolor that you can see the project as what was built. This is the CBRI building, Roorkee, Azad Bhavan. Very interesting. This was, though it was done in the, 55, there is a little quote about what he says about Azad Bhavan. He says, when I look back to the early period, I find that I was somewhat trapped in the so-called international style. Since early works from 1950 in the design of research laboratories, offices, and residences in Ahmedabad, although several of our projects had many common factors, there was one project which was different, and that was Azad Bhavan in Delhi. While discussing the project, no mention was made about the requirements. But Maulana Azad, who was then the president of Council of Cultural Relations, ICCR, started describing about the physical aspects of the building in the name of culture. He mentioned that the building has to have domes and arches and turrets, etc. And everybody blindly supported him and stayed quiet. While, as the young CSIR architect, I started commenting, saying that the characteristics of historical architecture is a product of knowledge and technology of the past period and way of life of that time. And that while we may have association with the past, present day architecture has to have expression of technology of present time. To his credit, Maulana Azad reacted, saying, what you said is correct and can be adopted. Though the building was well received and published in design magazines, I did not attempt a similar approach in other works. So this is the building, which is fortunately still there at IP Estate. This was one of the earliest residences that were done for the Pakistan High Commissioner. You can see that, the perspective really kind of puts across the material that's likely to be used, the kind of glazing, etc., etc. The insurance building, National Insurance Building in Kanpur, the Institute of Paleobotany in Lucknow. So you see a certain manner of arrangement of the building forms, types, and each of them have been given a certain identity. This again was a watercolor which was made by him. So there was a certain manner which was very Bauhausish, at that point of time. So you can see the influence that Gropius had on him until that period. So about 10 years after he returned, that was the kind of architecture that he engaged with. Then he says, design always requires a central idea. Only conceiving a central idea is also not enough, but a designer should be capable enough to transform it into a meaningful built form. That is the toughest job. If one can do it effortlessly, he can safely be called a good architect. So he starts his large project. Until then, he had been doing individual buildings, etc. Then he gets the Indian Institute of Technology, Kanpur, in the late 50s. When about IIT, he reflects later and he says, reflecting on my earlier experience, I had a feeling that I was surviving on knowledge gained at Harvard, and there was a sense of stagnation in the approach and a feeling of dissatisfaction. I had to search for setting my own direction by coming out of the clutches of the so-called modern architecture. This was the time I started assessing my work independently, also trying to search for deeper meaning and values associated with architecture. I was also observing the works of some of the seniors established professionals, including my contemporaries in the US, and reading provocative articles by recognized authors. Some of the works of known architects and writers led me to realize the deeper values and meanings associated with physical and also psychological needs that contribute to the evolution of a firm. It was a constant search for deeper understanding associated with human environment to architecture, rather than merely following cliches in the name of modern and also postmodern architecture as a pattern. When the design of IIT Kanpur was assigned to me, I was faced with new problems and challenges and overtaken partly by the desire to depart and search for solutions peculiar to the problem. The need to depart from the earlier rigid and large mass to meet functional needs on one hand, and the search for a human scale on the other, led the complex to be resolved into a cluster formation, creating greater transparency of landscape spaces. During the process, three things influenced my thinking, which was ultimately incorporated in the design. These were, the whole program was dissected and broken into a clustered form to establish a human scale. The second, building activities were connected with corridors, allowing two levels of movement, ensuring expansion of all activities. And the third, a service distribution using an underground corridor to serve various establishments of the campus. So what you see here is really a walkable inner core, which is the academic core of IIT Kanpur with the various landmark buildings. That was a sketch which he had done. You can see the signature that is put across. This was the original scheme which was made, the landmark library building in the foreground. These are the skylights, which he had explored to a large extent in the library. That's the overall master plan with the various buildings. The lecture hall complex, a fan-shaped, cluster of lecture halls of varying capacity, the library there, and the south block, and the northern laboratories, the southern laboratories, etc. This is the corridor, the two-level corridor that he talks about, which connect the various academic buildings. And then the services ran below this as a connect. Then we look at some other projects that he had done. This is the CBCI building, which is in New Delhi. That's the Balkrishna Harivallabhdas residence in Ahmedabad. A huge departure from what was otherwise known for in terms of residences. You can see the variation. So parallelly at that time, we realized many years later that the Swiss embassy here was being built and he was a local architect. So you see a lot of parallels in what was done here to what was done at this residence. This is the Gandhi Memorial Hall, the bare structure, which he had done with Mahinder Raj, with whom he had done a number of landmark projects. The staircase, and then around in the same decade, you also see his residence coming up. That is the interior of the residence. Madan Mahata's classic picture of the architect himself in his space. This was some studies that he had done in a clay modeling for the house, for the forms and the shape that he was looking at. So when you look at this, he talks about, he compares down the line when we spoke about the notes, he compares the two residences because they were done in the same decade. He says there is a certain sudden change of direction in my work after 1965. Balkrishna Harivallabhdas residence was completed in 1964 and my house was completed in 1967. Both have a theme and a strong expression of purpose. Harivallabhdas house emphasized the solar envelope against heat and landscape at various levels, including a sunk garden. My home has a central atrium around which all activities are organized with transparency by expressing the inner and outer spaces, including landscaped areas. Then you move on to some universities which he did. He had done the Bengaluru UAS campus. Then there was one at Rahuri, which was done. The manner in which they looked at, the site planning itself, context playing a huge role. An Indian pavilion, which was designed, which was unrealized for the Osaka International Expo in '69. So you see this flight of steps here in the foreground, what you see in the drawing here. You see this getting picked up much later when he's doing the Nehru Science Center and the National Science Center. So he says, architecture is the synthesis of one's understanding and interpretation. It's a personal effort backed by the cultivation, development, and conviction of the person. Architecture of quality is one that stands the test of time. So we move now on to the dairy. He does a lot of work for the Dairy Development, National Dairy Development Board. And Dudhsagar Dairy Mehsana happens to be one of the very well-known projects. And somehow this was a great favorite for a number of architectural critiques. A lot of them had picked it up. And in the recent exhibition that we mentioned, which happened in the Museum of Modern Art in the summer this year, the Project of Independence, Architectures of Decolonization in South Asia, there are mentions of his contribution to the dairy industry and also to the architectural language that happens around that time. I'm just going to read out from the curators Martino Sterili and Anoma Perez. So Martino writes, Among Kanvinde's most significant buildings are those he designed, making extensive use of exposed concrete for the National Dairy Development Board in several locations across India. These projects were all part of what came to be known as the White Revolution, the ambitious transformation of India into one of the world's largest producers of milk. Specifically, the NDDB was responsible for promoting the dairy cooperative movement that had started in the state of Gujarat in the mid-60s across the entire country in what became known as the Operation Flood. The White Revolution exemplified Nehru's vision of a massive industrialization of the country's economy. However, by supporting the establishment of cooperatives of individual farmers, the undertaking sought to retain the traditional livelihoods of small producers in a manner that related more to Gandhi's village approach for how to transform India into an independent and self-sufficient country. Kanvinde's Dudhsagar dairy, which was done between 70 and 73, is a monument of the remarkable socio-economic shift accompanying the White Revolution. Situated in the open countryside near the village of Mehsana in Gujarat, this cathedral of industrial production has an imposing presence. The building's layout is the result of an ingenious spatialization of the production process from the delivery of raw milk to the packaging of dairy products that harness gravity in order for the milk to flow through the plant. Kanvinde used concrete's formal potential in this instance for a powerful expression of the underlying socio-economic ambitions. This is most evident in the regular grid of ventilation shafts that allow the heat released in the production process to dissipate merely by means of convection currents. As architecture, these shafts form the building's crown and lend the building's profane function a highly evocative and expressive form. Anoma mentions a suite of industrial dairy complexes and associated housing and training facilities designed by Kanvinde and partners articulated further challenging realities that were becoming creatively productive in the work of post-colonial Indian architects in this period. Eschewing the aspirational rationalism of this architect's earlier industrial work in a new Bauhaus vein, these towering dairy buildings almost literally embodied Nehru's notion of temples of industry as key infrastructure in the so-called White Revolution that was securing India's agricultural self-sufficiency by simultaneously industrializing and socializing its milk production. The brute medium-tech expressionism of the built forms and finishes struck a balance between the rhetoric of industrial transformation and the reality, particularly in the technically under-equipped construction industry of an overabundance of labor with limited skills, where all hands needed to be engaged above and before the rationalizing prerogatives of the industrial efficiency. Then, so during his career, you see certain phases where he does buildings of a certain typology. And you look at what we are going to see in the next, you'll see that happening quite often. This is the Tantra Museum, which was in 74, a design which he had conceived. You can see the potential that it had it been built. Now, you also see that flight of steps. So that's a recurring feature that he had kind of tried out in various projects, which again comes back when you're looking at the Nehru Science Center, Mumbai. This is again a sketch which is done by him. The previous one was also a sketch done by him. These were various iterations that he had looked at for the project, and finally what was built. That's a model on the left, and the modularity, clusters, kind of humanizing it rather than making a huge mega structure, looking at various little components coming down together and connecting. Then in the 70s, late 70s, he did the NDDB building in Delhi near the Kamal Cinema. You can see what he tried doing here was, because it was an urban plot, he needed to go vertical, but not having to lose out on the green spaces, he created a series of terraces. So the offices could actually open out onto the terraces. So this became very well accepted interface in the design of buildings. Then he looked at the National Institute of Bank Management, which was in the 80s. This incidentally was the first project on which Sanjay, who had just come back after his graduation, post-graduation in the US, joined the firm. And this is where he started working on the office projects. So this was his start too. So you see a natural stream, of course, which was a seasonal one flowing through the site. So the manner in which Kanvinde addressed the site plan was that he looked at, kind of bifurcating the requirements very logically. So left was essentially the admin blocks and the training center. The top left was the hostels, and the right-hand side, which is separated by the course of water, became the housing. So you see use of local materials there, and exploration, starting to use aggregate in little parts. So you see the center part here, which is using the aggregate. The rest of it is all the basalt stone from there. Irma, for NDDB, was also done about the same period. The large campus with various typology, etc. Then he also started a huge engagement with his works in Jammu and Kashmir. This is the High Court and Legislative Assembly, a model which kind of dragged on, and it got built over a huge span of time. Then in the 80s, he also did a lot of work for the Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy of Administration. Mr. Yugandhar, who was the director then, was obviously very artistically, kind of inclined, and they had a wonderful working equation. So that's the quadrangle that you see and the various buildings that were built. That was the library building. So it started with building this library block because that was, they had a fire and the building had gone. So they built that, which overlooks the valley below. Then there is a visitors hostel, there was an auditorium, and then there is the admin block. So in this library building, we also see work of Jatinda. Wonderful. I mean, this is only a part of it. It was a wonderfully large 24 feet by 4 feet mural, which was done. And unfortunately, what I have here is only 2 parts of it. There is a third part which is missing. So you can see the kind of interaction and the synergy that they'd worked with. Sanjay mentioned in some of the earlier projects, there were places where artists of repute had already kind of worked and put in their mural. So they didn't really look at buildings separate. And Kanvinde really looked at his buildings as really a work of art, I think. You look at this, I'm particularly fond of this perspective, which he had done much later. You can see it's like somewhere in 91. I think he, in fact, made this perspective maybe in 90 or even after the project was complete for a presentation somewhere. It's a pen and ink sketch, very finely made. So that is how it got translated. You can see the cascading turrets, the course which went up, and that was his way of actually relating to the Purana Killa across the street. He'd done both these museums by then. By the late 80s, he had completed the Nehru Science Center and the National Science Center. So later he reminisces and he says, Nehru Science Center, Mumbai has characteristics which are not usual. The need to use forced ventilation and artificial light resulted in the introduction of structure using columns as ventilation shaft, which gets reflected in the expression of the building with its own peculiarities. National Science Center, Delhi, presents a building as a large-size crystal with facilities for indoor and outdoor exhibition areas at all levels. It introduced vertical shafts to serve several purposes, such as for elevators, ventilation needs, and also unforeseen future services. Circulation is introduced in a way that the public rise to the top through escalators and descend down gradually to the lowest level through the exhibition areas before they depart. It is important to recognize the central idea in the case of both the projects. Since the museum is a center of learning, it is essential to have an environment in a building which can set a mood and generate excitement and interest that helps in the receptivity of mind. While meeting all building considerations, an effort is made in these projects that while fulfilling the needs, it can also become symbolic. The basic idea behind the museum design is to use elements of repetitive modules, which in their application would be expected to create regimentation. To overcome such a thing, modules are made of different volumes while using a common structural denominator. At the same time, they are twisted and connected to each other in a varied manner, creating variation of interest, yet maintaining commonality and integrity. Though both the projects have a common ideology, the form of expression is different in terms of quality of space and overall visual appearance. One of the things a designer experiences in the pursuit of a project is that when he does get himself caught in an old situation, then backed by the intensity of search, he arrives at an answer which is appropriate and befitting the need and peculiarities of the problem. Very well summed up. Then we look at towards the late 80s, he does the National Insurance Academy, again, where Sanjay was very involved and very much a part of the design team itself. And later, between 2001 and 2004, so just around the time when he kind of passes, we do the next phase, second phase for it. So what you're seeing here is only the phase one. You see that there was again, a course, which is natural course, which is kind of flowing through. So he creates the academic area and the training centers on one side and builds a bridge across connecting the hostel. So it becomes a very integral, rather than separating it out very far away, he kind of makes them both together in close proximity. This is the view, and you see this bridge, which was kind of very known. The skylights, again, that you see to the library. Again, there is a little note that he writes because, like I mentioned, he had done projects of similar typology close together, almost in the same decade or just spilling over onto the early part of the next decade kind of a thing. So there was a certain thought process which had kind of worked and he had brought it to a certain level. So he feels compelled to write about it. So he says NIA and NIBM. The other projects which are significant and which are a departure from the earlier work are the National Institute of Bank Management and the National Insurance Academy, both located in Pune. NIBM, the first one, was inspired by the use of traditional local building materials, that is trapstone, and the complex has taken a form with spaces to create humanistic and intimate environmental qualities. As the complex had normal training at junior level and also one for executive training development, it was thought desirable to create a condition of environment which is not awe-inspiring but intimate and friendly. NIA is essentially made more like a traditional ashram, a seminary where participants work and live at one place. In the above complex, participants are separated by a corridor in the form of a bridge that connects the hostel and the academy areas together. The bridge, meant to be a meeting place overlooking the landscaped garden spaces, and also with the movement close to the library, makes access to it inviting. Towards the later years, designed by a number of large-scale master plan projects, Kanvinde takes up a lot of large-scale master plan projects. By the nature and scale of the projects, he would team with professionals from the affiliated fields form a consortium while being the team leader. Dronagiri Township at Navi, Mumbai, Sindhudurg headquarters at Urus in the west coast of Maharashtra, and the Central Business District at Shahdara, Delhi are some of the projects that he does at the master plan level. Detailed models made in wood at varying scales were an integral part of the design development. His swan song was, of course, the ISKCON Temple. Says the architects who are confronted with problems peculiar to modern functional design have to at the same time create an architectural expression that would reflect the present day culture of India. This is the Dronagiri, that's business district. That's Banas Dairy. Again, a wonderfully, very beautifully done. This is in the, I think this perspective was done in probably 92, 91, 92, when the project was kind of conceived. And this was done with just colors, color pencils. This is how it was built. Architecture is the crystallized physical expression of culture projected into space and form. And that's what you see in his exploration at the temples. He had done a number of temples. Of course, the one which is most documented is ISKCON. This is a model which he had done initially. How he kind of, maneuvered through one little point of entry and then took the people around. So it was like a production now, which he kind of created in his design itself. They went up through all of this, came up onto the Garbhagriha, Sanctum Sanctorum, and then they moved down and then came back. So, and at that time, he actually was given, before he started designing, the Guru Swamiji there had given him a volume of, 18 volumes of Bhagavad Gita, and Kanvinde was not a ritualistic person, really. But when he started designing this, I remember, and that was soon after when I kind of had got married, I remember him sitting down in his study after dinner and going through the Bhagavad Gita. So whatever he came up with was parallelly trying to understand and not just replicate what temple meant in what we understood at that point of time. So you can see the manner in which the shikaras were hollowed out, because technology kind of allowed you to do that at this point of time. So he really explored that to the hilt. I'm going to just read out little excerpts from essays, which we have in the monograph. I should have read it maybe earlier, but so Ashok Lal, one of the persons whom we had requested, we wanted essays to be written on him in the monograph, so they were not just academicians, but there were also people who knew him at close quarters. So they knew him for his humanistic values. So I'm just going to read a little bit towards the end of the talk we are. So I'm just reading from Ashok Lal's Achyut Kanvinde and his Times. He talks about when Shaukat and him set out. The year is 1945. Two young professionals, Achyut Kanvinde, an architect, and Shaukat Rai, an engineer, depart together on a sponsorship for a study tour to the US. One can only imagine how the energy of an emergent new nation, waiting to be freed of its shackles of colonial rule, hopeful of building its own future, founded on modern institutions and armed with new knowledge, would be coursing through the veins of these two young men. They were the meritorious ones chosen by a new scientific institution, the CSIR, for their potential for contributing to the task of nation building. Though the sponsorship was for a limited purpose of studying modern laboratories over a mere 3-month period, they ended up enrolling in the master's program at Harvard to study for an extra year. The bond between the architect and the engineer was to endure through life. And the tenets of modernism in architecture being articulated at the time under the leadership of Walter Gropius at Harvard's Graduate School of Design would become the lasting ideological foundation for Achyut Kanvinde's architectural practice, with the genesis of Kanvinde and Rai, the firm which was formed after they had fulfilled an obligation by working for some years at the CSIR in return for their sponsorship. It's interesting, when Shaukat went, though an engineer, he enrolled at the Harvard School. And on coming back, I think he's probably one of the only engineers who's actually registered with Council of Architecture. Then I also go on to reading a little excerpt from Miki Desai, Achyut Kanvinde, a silent modernist. When A.P. Kanvinde and Shaukat Rai started their practice, Kanvinde and Rai in 1955, he had Gropius on his mind. Concerned as he was about the directionless Indian architectural scene of the mid-50s, he had selected moderate and problem-solving architecture as one of his paths. Later on, his modernist ideas grew out of the Gropius mode and became a modernism a la mode brutalist expression, where again he was a moderate who kept user and the behavior central to his design. This is why we see three personas of the same architect, one emerging from industrialization, pharmaceutical industries, dairies, and research, his thesis at Harvard, and institution-oriented buildings, education, and banking. The second one coming through the health facility, and third through the residential architecture, where, especially in Ahmedabad, he works with aristocratic clients with aspirations for a modern lifestyle after stepping out of the old city traditional living. All three were important to the intellectuals of the day, influenced by the Nehruvian thought. So, and then we also have Narendra Dengle, who writes in Achyut Kanvinde and Modernism in India. I kind of feel it's good to kind of look at it after we've seen the work to see what Dengle has to say. He says, Kanvinde and Rai, later Kanvinde, Rai and Chowdhury, established themselves as an exemplary professional practice that was known for professional integrity and managing a good blend of engineering and architectural services, with the architect still very much in control, like a maestro conducting an orchestra that encouraged talent and dedication from architects employed under him, as well as seeking quality inputs from structural and service engineers. Very early on in his practice, he realized the importance of teamwork. He picked some of the best engineers as his consultants and maintained excellent working relations with them. Their common concern was quality architecture, well supported by responsible professionalism. His practice recognized the talent of Pathak and Damle, Mahendraraj and Diolalika, who earned names for themselves for their competency in structural and plumbing engineering. It was also Kanvinde's nature to recognize talent in young and promising architects. When one understands that he gave a boost to many architectural firms and individuals, including B.V. Doshi, Anantraje, Shirgaonkar, Design Group, and the Group, to name just a few, by handing over jobs that came to his office, then one realizes Kanvinde's generosity in mentoring talent in a responsible way. This must be one of the rarest examples anywhere in the world where one professional architect willingly handed over a project to another without hesitating or getting credit for it. While architects were always hungry for work, often taking on more than what they could chew, Kanvinde's gesture speaks volumes of his philanthropy and selectiveness of projects he himself preferred to work on. While talking about the nature of the projects that he did and the manner in which he handled, Dengle goes on to saying, one is at once taken by the delicacy of form of his buildings and the rationality of approach to campus planning for movements and activity location. Moving around, one is always comfortable in Kanvinde's buildings because of the appropriation of natural light and movement of air. The spatiality of Kanvinde's projects had an entirely different openness than contemporary modern brutalist architecture in the US, to which it comes nearest. What makes Kanvinde's architecture memorable and significant beyond his times? And what would the current generation learn from his work? For this, one must take a closer look at how he practiced. Besides professionalism and the support staff, he had in his office a very able engineer partner in Shaukat Rai, and later also in Morad Chowdhury. Shaukat Rai once stated that he insulated Kanvinde from the mundane aspects of work, such as contractual hassles, municipal follow-up, site issues, and managing the engineering and account staff employed at the office. But besides that backup, Kanvinde knew that his strength lay in his design sensibilities and ability to educate or persuade the client to look at things his way. So we're almost to the end of the presentation. So we dipped into Vrinda Kanvinde's thesis topic, where she looked at tracing the architectural authorship through archives of Indian modernist Achyut Kanvinde. So to sum up, you can see actually the decades that he worked, more than 50 odd years that he practiced. And like he mentioned in one of his quotes, he was always like a student, constantly learning the ropes. So he started initially from Atira and Azad Bhavan Physical Research Laboratories, which was the first of its kind, following the Bauhaus style, true to its, to the style. Then he moves on into the 60s to expose brick and concrete, the Indian Institute of Technology, Gandhi Memorial Hall, his own residence, etc., are examples of that. Then the third part of his work looks at actually experiments with grit finish, a brutalist, ascending forms, and chamfered edges, which get reflected in the Dudhsagar Dairy, which we saw images of, Ashoka Estate at Delhi, Barakamba Road, Hotel Broadway in Srinagar, the National Dairy Development Board office building in Delhi, the Science Center in Mumbai and New Delhi. In the fourth phase, he further experiments with grit finish and sloped roof lights, etc. So that is in the National Institute of Bank Management, the Institute of Rural Management, the Insurance Academy, and the Ikeda Friendship Center at for Bharat Soka Gakkai. And finally, you come to the phase where he looks at ISKCON, and I think that becomes then the ultimate. He looks at Hindu motifs, the marble, sandstone cladding. So he had engaged with the Anandmayi Ashram in the 80s. He had done a couple of projects for them there. He had done the Yagnashala. So I think that must have been his initial interaction with looking at, traditional typology. But he looked at interpreting it differently. And finally, the ISKCON and the Kali Mata Mandir at Kolkata is still under construction, following principally his initial designs. So learning is a continuous process. My designs are changing over the years. In fact, I'm like a young student learning the ropes. This is what he says. Doshi was a very dear friend of his. They used to obviously interact a lot. And in the initial years, there was a lot of, because he was doing a lot of work in Ahmedabad and vice versa, there was a lot of spending time with each other. So he wrote the foreword for the book. And in that he writes, for me, Kanvinde's life and practice can be termed as parampara, an ongoing living tradition. Multifaceted, he had also written the book soon after he completed IIT Kanpur with James Miller, Campus Design in India. Then much later, after he passed away, there are a few books which have been written by various people. So that's one of them, which was brought out by BNCA Pune. This was Dialogues with Indian Masters. Very interesting format, which Tengle had used, where there is reproduction, there are recordings of that. This, of course, came in a tad too late. We only managed to celebrate his 100th year. So that was a compilation of all his work. And then, of course, now in the last year, where the work was represented also at the Museum of Modern Art, New York. So I close by this quote from him: "My buildings are my best memory. No other memory is required." Thank you so much.
Wonderful, wonderful. And it's also reminiscing, because I suddenly realized that me and many of my friends are very lucky, like you both are very lucky, that I also knew people who are 20, 30 years older than me in the profession of visual arts. And not only in visual arts, I knew Kumar Gandharv, I knew Bhimsen Joshi, Kapila Vatsyayan, and many others like Anand, Mulkraj Anand, writers, poet, painter. You see, one thing I find during Kanvinde's time, there's all, I think in the period of history, there's a time where many learned and sensitive people exist. Like you mentioned about, say, Bhava, Dr. Bhava and others. There are scientists, poets, writer, painter, architects, and then you have a Adan Pradan, and you have exchange ideas and thoughts, and you meet. So you can't misbehave, you know what I mean? If you have in your class people who are sensitive and working hard, you will be guilty if you don't, so likewise. But I suddenly, when I was a student in JJ and thereafter, when I was exhibiting, Hebbar, Bendre, Chawra, all these people used to come to my show. Jatin ka show hai jayenge. And we were all friends, And so I met Mr. Kanvinde many times, but very few words exchanged, like him, like his son, And, but it's also when you have the legacy of great scholar and the great creative person in your family, you have to also behave yourself in the sense the son and the daughter-in-law. You know what I mean? You have to carry it forward. When I say you, I don't mean you in particular. All of us have to. Of the country, of the period, and also our, camaraderie, the people of that period who have done great works. And see, Doshi is a very dear friend of mine. He's also much older than me. And he was, and many of these architects I knew, and it's very wonderful that, but there's a sea change. These things are not talked about anymore. Now, when I say talked about, not in terms of lecture, these things are not shared, like when you talk of Mr. Mahendra Raj, So one day, Mahendra Raj was very dear to me, very, very dear, very fond of me. I loved him. So I said, Raj Sahab, all your designs look like if I cut a fruit, the section of it, looks like, so he hugged me, So many of these people imbibe from nature, which is the correct thing, A lot of people are copying today. But, it's wonderful for this presentation. This is, frankly, this Meet the Artist program is a beginning. Frankly, those who are interested in the subject, those who have a passion, those who are excited by this, should carry it further and dig up, So,
and I think have dialogues, because I think today what we lack really is dialogues of a true nature where we are borrowing from each other,
Yes,
through
yes.
discussions. I think that's kind of really wonderful. For us, definitely it was a huge weight on the shoulder. I can't say that I enjoyed my initial years.
Yeah.
Of course, I worked with Morad for a number of years initially when I joined the firm. It's only in the late 90s that I started working with Kanvinde. But also putting the book together was a great discovery. I think the analysis, the looking at works, and all of that. And I'm happy. And we put the book together purely as a documentation. Didn't really want any kind of, explanation to it, because that's the way he also liked his buildings. He never, wanted to justify what he did. Right. He always wanted people to experience and go back with whatever each of them felt.
Yeah.
But we hope that the next generation takes it forward and uses this as a resource, which I'm happy in a way that Vrinda did in a small bit in a thesis.
You see, I also knew Shaukat Rai,
yes.
Morad, all these people, although they're
wonderful
much older,
human beings,
we all shared little things.
Yes.
And a fantastic time. It's all empty now. It's all, a kind of vacuum.
You're wonderful human being. I am actually very, very grateful for the grace that I got the opportunity to meet them at such close quarters.
Yes, wonderful.
And, even share a little bit. So
wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks so
very
much.
Kind. But let's spread it further. As I requested, please send the entire presentation to all the architecture colleges. So give unsolicited, they will not ask for it. But you send a copy to it and say, well, it is for the students of College of Architecture.
Sure.
And I think thank you very much.
It's really lovely because you brought out that book. And I think now suddenly for people of my generation and younger, it's so exciting that there's a book like that available, or how Rohit Raj and Vandini have done the book on Mahinder Raj.
Absolutely.
Or, Khushnu has done with Doshi. It's just so lovely because suddenly we are seeing, it's like, having a deep dive into a whole journey of life that we wouldn't be privy to. And you get to see just very smart pictures and occasional pictures and some things, but to have that thing of, looking at a person and the work together, that's very exciting for us, I think. And thank you very much for sharing this. And I just wonder, we'll open it up to the audience. I know there is not much time, but...
just before that, Sanjay, do carry the cross on your shoulder. Is he listening?
Yes, of course.
Yes.
So, please, everyone, if anyone has any question, please do direct them to the speakers and please feel free to ask. While they, until someone raises their hand, and I'm just wondering, are there projects that you mentioned, couple of projects that you're taking on, which were done by Kanvinde in his time? Are there other projects like, say, IIT Kanpur, anywhere else, where there are extensions or the NDDB, where they ask you to come back and work in that?
Yes. So IIT Kanpur, even during his lifetime, so in the late 90s, they came back with expansion, which was happening, and we continued working at IIT Kanpur. We still continue working, but much lesser now in the last couple of years. But before that, we did most of the academic buildings. So there is obviously a certain sympathetic approach. When you build in a campus which is already existing, there is a certain language that you would like to follow. So that is something that we do kind of ensure. Similarly, at Dudhsagar Dairy, incidentally, tomorrow there's going to be after all these years, they're finally looking at an expansion, and tomorrow is a groundbreaking ceremony there.
Wonderful.
So again, it becomes a huge responsibility because you kind of think twice, 4 times on what your building needs to be like, among. And the other thing, of course, is to create a certain awareness in all these projects, because a lot of them want to pull it down because they feel, it's time, building is old, and we need to. So each time I'm trying to show them brochures, booklets, magazines where things are written about these books and saying, look, we need to kind of preserve them, and they are very heritage buildings in the development of the country and the architecture of the country. Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. Is there any question?
Yeah,
There's a comment or a question from Rajiv Nath. Why don't we pay adequate attention to aspects like parking spaces? Most of the time it is such an ordeal in navigating the spaces inside and outside many buildings.
Well, like in the case of IIT Kanpur itself, basically, if you notice, the entire circulation pattern is peripheral. So leaving the entire pedestrian area in the center as a free area. So I think this became a kind of a overriding factor in most of his designs. And I think we've also kind of followed that in, the projects that we do now.
And are you planning to take some of his beautiful kind of architectural drawings and illustrations? Would you have an exhibition of any kind?
This is my dream, Siddharth. In fact, when we brought out the book, I actually wanted to bring out a little smaller book with just the sketches, just so that it can actually enthuse the younger generation to kind of pick up sketches. But we didn't manage to, because at that time it became a little too much. But now that the presentation is done, I definitely think...
No, you must hold an exhibition of his drawings. They're wonderful. They're very good work. They're very good. I can see 6B, 4B pencil, Yeah, I can, it's fantastic and wonderful. And all the proportions are also perfect. There's no deadline, So, and many architects don't sketch anymore. They don't do drafting.
Nobody wants to sketch.
They're all CAD.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's very sad. I pity them. This is happening also in the painting world. A lot of people are not drawing and sketching anymore. But it's wonderful though. But maybe you will also, I would like to request the Council of Architects and all of you, and all those who are living, Doshi and Rajrawal and all of you, should do an architectural museum in India.
There have been many ideas floated on this.
But it takes 40, 50 years for the
I
idea.
think Council of Architecture, Habib has done a fair amount of work on it. And I think he started the research center in Bangalore. I think the foundation stone is laid. He had done a competition and all of that. So I'm looking forward to that. But talking about sketches, I read in the chat written by Dhanashekaran, where he used to be one of the young trainees at the office, young architect at the office. He says, he saw my sketch at my drafting table and said to me, come, I'll teach you how to draw a line. He was 81 and I was 25 then. Yeah. That was his gentleness, love and generosity, a true guru. I'm so delighted to see that note written by you.
Sanjay, do a little gallery in Delhi of his drawings. Only of his drawings. And there can be. It doesn't have to be a 20 crore building. A little gallery of his drawings would be fantastic. And maybe there will be a section of other architects' drawing also, but mainly Kanvinde's drawing.
Yeah, sure.
Be associated. Happy to be associated. Anyway, please ask if
there any other questions, anyone? So a lot of people have actually sent appreciative comments in the chat. There's Amba Sanya, Meena Sabnani, Radhika Vishwanathan and Varshadas. But if there's anyone else who wants to ask a question, please go ahead. And are there any things in the offering that you have that you're planning? Like you said, there was this exhibition at MoMA. Are there anything else that you plan to do with Kanvinde's legacy or to share things with others?
Well, we are saddled with this huge collection of drawings, and we still don't know. I mean, we've been approached by various people to, who are wanting to archive the stuff and digitize.
Don't give it. To a museum.
Yeah,
My heart will go out to you if you do a museum. So-
You know, it's really a tough kind of a thing. So MoMA actually wanted to keep the few drawings that they'd taken. They wanted the originals, of course. So once they finished the exhibition, they wanted to keep it with them. But it was a hard decision and we brought it back.
No, first the
But I
show should
feel-
be in India. Hello. The
Absolutely.
first show should be in India.
No, that is what exactly our thought as well.
Yeah.
No, that was our thought.
National
So,
Gallery
you
of
know,
Modern
that's
Art,
what.
No, wherever. But it should be in India first before it goes anywhere.
True.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Thank you. Wonderful.
Thank you.
Is there any
Thank you
question?
so much. Before I close, I really
Yeah.
at Kanvinde Rai and Chowdhury, people who have been here over the years, and Seth in particular, who's been the keeper of these treasures. So the reason we've been able to get to all these drawings is primarily because he's been kind of really holding it very dear to his heart, and you know, so
Well,
we can't
that's-
find the drawings. There is a method to the madness as far as he's concerned. So we ask for a drawing and he produces it. So time for a regularized archive for sure.
I mean, I remember when we were doing the IIC exhibition and we wanted to find the original drawings of Joseph Allenstein, and no one had it. IIC didn't have a single drawing. It was such a sad thing. And then that time J.R. Bhalla was still alive. And I remember going to his studio and he pointed out to 6 or 7 cupboards full of thousands of rolled up drawings saying, if you can find them, take it. And, you know, it was quite incredible.
Yeah, but it was so sad. His drawings were the only ones which were not there at this exhibition.
Yeah.
They do not have a record of it, I'm told. Which
No,
is
that is
really
surprising.
tragic. And I'd worked with Stein. So, you know, I mean, there was.
The one thing we managed was we managed to get about 12 drawings and we got them conserved and mounted and framed and gave it to IIC. So I hope they are there. So yeah, so I hope.
No, we don't have a sense of historicity. We have no concern for our legacy. So we should revive that. Since we don't have it, let's not only lament, let's build up.
Very right.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Are
you.
there last opportunity for anyone to ask questions, or we will wrap it up. And thank you very much, Tanuja and Sanjay. Thank you. It's very kind of you to have done this, and I hope a lot more people will get to hear and see the presentation. And I think a lot of us will be now tempted. He's already bought the book a while back, so I think we all will be tempted to get our own copy now. And if you do the exhibition, please let us all know. I think people will be delighted for an exhibition on him.
Yes,
and
of course.
I hope when our art center comes up that you will come and visit it, because it's quite a beautiful sculptural drawing and on which is based on the model of those she's, you know. And we hope that in a year's time we can open our doors to the public. And hopefully that may be a small place that you could exhibit some of the drawings and models. We'll be delighted. They're very small compared to others, but exciting. And thank you again. And
Thank you.
all of you who've joined, every second Saturday of the month, we do this lecture series at 5 p.m. now. Early it was at 6. It's been 260. This is the 261st. It's been an incredible 19 years. And I think by the time we've gone online since a year and a half, it's been very exciting for us, because earlier it was physical in all the people who came to Bhubaneswar, whereas now we can have all the likes of you, who can do these kind of presentations. And our next speaker is going to be, hopefully, inshallah, Monisha Ahmed, who will speak on the, she'll talk a little bit, I think, about her center in Ladakh that she set up on the arts, but also on the amazing work she's done with Ladakhi nomadic textiles, on which her PhD thesis, I think, at Cambridge was based on also, and something she's worked on for about 2 decades. We also have a forthcoming talk on Rini Dhumal's art by her daughter Radhika. We wanted to have a gap between, I think, the generation speaking about the earlier generation, but I think it's so exciting for us. And later we'll have also a talk on Ram Kinkar Bej in time to come. So I think some lovely talks, I hope, and I hope all of you will also attend it. Thank you very much. And
Thank you.
good evening and goodbye.
Thank you so
Pleasure.
very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.